Okay, cool guys. Well, we'll get this thing rolling. We still got a few attendees dropping in here, but we're over 100 and we are 1 minute over time. So we'll get this thing rocking and rolling. So first off, gentlemen, of course, thanks for joining us for today's webinar. I know that the audience, we've gotten a lot of good feedback already this week about people just being excited about you two, your experience, and of course the topic that we're going to dive into today, which is around in-season speed training. So just the agenda real quick for everybody coming into the call. Of course, we'll kick off with some quick intros of Zach and Tony here for those of you guys who aren't familiar with them. But then we're pretty much going to dive straight into the content of, in-season training and all things related to that. And the format that we like to do here so that you guys can get as much value as possible is almost kind of create like you guys get to watch Tony and Zach and how these minds are thinking about this topic of in-season speed training and kind of the conversations that they might have behind the scenes, but then also be able to drop your questions into the chat and answer any specific questions that you guys have on the topic. So diving straight in here, of course, we've got Tony Holler here on the call, founder of Feed the Cats, head coach at Plainfield North High School, 40 plus years coaching, how many 265 days straight running, or 625, was it 625?
767.
767 straight days of running is another metric there for you guys we should have put that in your intro. And, I think on his first webinar with us, right, Zach, this is the first one you've done with us. We got Zach Dechant, TCU Athletics, Assistant Athletic Director of Human Performance. Been there a long time, started back in 2008. So, of course, we've got two coaches here that are just a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we're super excited to hear from you guys. Zach, do you have being that this is your first time in one of our webinars, do you have an interesting fact about yourself?
I do. My interesting fact is you actually spelled my name wrong.
Oh, we'll have to.
That's all right, Dylan. That's all right. But it's ZACH for all the fans out there. So there's my interesting fact. First and last time on this webinar.
There we go. Yeah, fair enough. We got to make sure that everybody can find you on the gram.
Don't worry about it. I'm just messing with you. I'll be back if you have me.
Fair enough. I'm sure we will. Okay, cool, guys. So again, we'll dive kind of straight into the meat and potatoes here. And I always like to start by teeing things up with kind of an open-ended question to get the conversation going. And for the audience, as you guys are listening in, please, anytime, if you have a question, start dropping your questions in the chat, because we'll kind of open things up with a general discussion here, and then we'll transition to taking you guys' questions and having Zach and Tony answer them. So drop your questions in the Q&A box and we'll grab those and get them answered. But just to get the conversation going, I think big picture, how would you guys in general, and we'll have both of you guys answer this, explain to, let's say, a layperson, the importance of in-season speed training? Why is that important? Why does the mindset and the culture need to shift around that? Because I'm talking to coaches all day long, and I still feel like there's a ton of coaches out there who are not fully sold on this idea that speed training is something that needs to be done in season or year round, and the benefits of that aren't that great, right? And that it might even be taking away from their performance in game, right? So I would love to hear from both of you guys on just, how you would explain that importance and why it's something that we should be doing.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to give you two reasons. The first reason is that it's an inoculant against injury. You really only hold on to the effects of speed within, the biochemical system, the neurological system. You only hold on to speed for about 2 to 8 days. And after that time period, you basically become detrained against it. And you need this to inoculate against it. It's kind of the conundrum, right? Coaches forever, when I was a young coach, thought, if you run fast, you're going to get hurt. So we're not going to run fast. But then when you went out and ran fast, you had a time of 40 or whatever in football. They used to have the scout day come in and as a junior and you'd time 40s and you'd have 5 guys get hurt. Well, we can't go run fast because guys are going to get hurt. But then what happens when you have to run fast? And so you need this as a stimulus so that you inoculate yourself against injury, because when you call upon it, you need it there. And if you're not training it on a regular basis, and we say every 7 days, we just make it easy, right? It's Vladimir Issurin's residual training effects that he says it's 2 to 8 days or so. But we just say you need to train a high intensity high intent sprint every 7 days, right? So that's the first thing, is to inoculate yourself against the chance of injury. And the second thing is development. What's more important than speed? They don't have barbells on the field. Court, whatever it is you're playing. They don't have barbells out there. And so this has to be the priority in your training to me, because it's the difference maker on the field. And oftentimes practices are going to be done in the middle ground. It's going to be, it's going to be short rests and moderate intensity the entire time that you're at practice, because it looks like busy work, and it's fatiguing, and we've got to move around all the time, and all these coach speak things. And so you never get that, you never get that in practices. You never get the stimulus to actually develop speed. And so there it goes back to the first thing, is that you're not inoculating yourself against injury as well. But to me, it's got to be inoculate yourself against injury, and then we need to develop it year round. Every week we need to have that stimulus in there. And so for me, it's development and protect you against some injury.
Got it.
Yeah, I love both of those points, and I think I can build on those points. I'm a science guy, and there's a word called homeostasis, which means we have a balance. And for some people, we may get them faster during the season, but for other people, we may keep them from getting slower. And speed is the tide that lifts all boats. I've argued with so many soccer coaches, lacrosse coaches, even football coaches, that say that max speed sprinting in a straight line does not happen in my sport. And my response is, but do you move in different directions? Do you move, do you sprint in a circular form, or do you have to do things explosively? And they're like, of course. And I said, describe your best player. And they always say fast, explosive. They never talk about endurance. They never say that, oh, she's slow as hell, but she can run all day. No, that doesn't make a great player. It's the fast, explosive movements. So we need to train speed for that. And I often talk about the bulletproofing of your hamstrings by sprinting. We all know that muscles contract, but we don't think about them relaxing. And when we sprint, we must have a contraction in a nanosecond, followed by a relaxation in a nanosecond. If that relaxation does not happen, when we stretch a contracted muscle, it will break. And so the only thing that I think truly bulletproofs the hamstrings is to practice that contract, relax cycle at real speed, which means we're running fast. I'll throw in that just because speed is super important, and I think should be the priority in all movement sports, it doesn't have to be the majority of your training. Speed training can be 15 minutes a couple times a week. And then to jump on the health thing, once again, I really believe that a fast team is a healthy team, and a healthy team is a fast team. So the barometer of health, in my opinion, is how fast is that kid. If I have a football team or a baseball team or a soccer team that comes in on Monday and we are 1 to 2 miles an hour slower than normal, we have a health problem. And we need, as coaches, to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what did we do to create this slowness? And if it wasn't us, we need to have that talk with our athletes. What are you doing over the weekend to be so unhealthy on Monday? So I just think it's win-win. I wrote an article 6 years ago saying no football coach in their right mind would time sprints during the season because he knows his team's getting slower. And I'll be damned if they're actually doing that now. They're actually timing people, and they understand. And when you time shit, you learn shit. And they are learning about recovery and rest, and what we did the day before matters today, and all those things.
Beautiful. I'm taking notes here. Hopefully the audience is too. And again, for the audience, feel free to start dropping any questions you've got in the Q&A, and then we'll transition over to that. But I do have a couple of follow-up questions for both of you. So Tony, we'll start with you just because we're on you. I love what you said about a fast team is a healthy team. A slow team is, you could, extrapolate from that. A slower team is an unhealthy team, right? So I love the correlation to health. Would you go so far as to say that a team whose speed is decreasing coming into that training session, they're a mile or two slower, is even a pre-indicator to injury? Would you go so far as to say like it's predictive that injury is coming if course doesn't change?
I think so. And I know Zach's going to talk about this, but the reason why they're slow is almost always a volume mistake the day before or the week before, where coaches intentionally burn the steak. I believe it or not, coaches actually use words like, we're going to break them down this week. We're going to put them, they're going to go through some hell this week. Well, when you time your kids that following Monday and they're slow, that's not good. They're unhealthy. So does it predict injury? I think high volumes predict injury, and high volumes also make you slow. So I think that one of those two things will predict that your team is not going to be healthy.
Got it. That makes sense. And the follow-up that I would have for you, Zach, you went into something really interesting there. And I think that so much of the value for everybody on the call of listening to you guys talk about this is that it could be twofold. It could be that this is new information to them. They're getting exposed to thinking about this in a way that they haven't thought about it before. But I think that on the other side of that, it could be, they're thinking about all of the things that you guys are, but getting the language to be able to explain it to somebody is important. And I feel like so much of the value that both of you guys bring is that you are great communicators of this, right? Not just great executors and experts of it, but great at communicating it, right? And so a question that came to mind when you were sharing your answer there was, I could hear a coach in my brain saying, yeah, but we run fast and a lot at practice. So like, what is the difference between the speed training that you're going to do and them sprinting in practice and getting reps in practice? What makes it speed training, and what differentiates from them running fast in practice?
Right. And it's easy for somebody like me who's had access to GPS to be able to show them data, and it's an easy sell to be like, look, this is what they're running when they're at top speed, 21, 22, 23 mile an hour. Here's where your practices reside. And I actually have a presentation on this. And Tony, this is what Tony was talking about. This is where your practices reside and kind of the average speed of practices. They never touch anywhere near that. So it's easy to back it up if you have access to that data. But in real terms, if you don't have access to that, 99% of your practice is going to be done somewhere between 75 and 85% of effort. It doesn't matter what sport, whatever it is. The other thing to that is that they don't allow you to have full rest periods oftentimes, right? And with speed, we need full rests. We need full recoveries so that you can repeat that effort. And so for us, I know we're going to talk about this, but I'm going to throw it out there right now. The easy way to implement this stuff in season is you just place it in part of your warm-up or right after your warm-up in your first whatever block of training, block of practice that you have. I've seen football teams that have the receivers run go routes against a defensive back, and it's in a way sports specific. I mean, it is sports specific, right? You're trying to run a deep ball, but defensive back doesn't touch them, and they both have to sprint for that 10 or 20 yard like distance, right? I'm talking about a fly sprint at that 10 or 20 yard distance. So it ends up being a 40 or 50 yard run. And so I've seen teams implement it that way. I've seen teams time fly 10s in the at the end of the warm up. Base running, an idea for baseball coaches is we always have our base running session right after the warm up. And so the idea is you could put gates out there and time them for a 30 yard sprint or whatever from home to first. You can tie this stuff into practice. All it has to be is you can't be mowing them over. You need full recovery. So give the kids a chance to rest, right? A couple minutes rest, but have them run their specific pattern or sport or whatever it is at max intensity, 2, 3, 4 times. And now you've touched on that once a week to get that stimulus. I think the best idea, like Tony says, I mean, Tony's going to back this up, is if you can time these things, all the better, because you're giving feedback. You're getting kids to compete not only against themselves and their times, but against the rest of the team. You post those things so that they know how they're doing. You can see it on a weekly basis, and that serves as your, the word I'm looking for here, it's not auto-regulation. It serves as your indicator for how their health is, right? I can't think of the word right now that I'm looking for. Tony, help me out. What's the word when you're doing a little survey at the beginning of your workout to see how kids feel? Why can I not think of this right now?
You're asking a 65-year-old guy to come up with the word. Come on now.
Somebody will put it in the chat, but this gives you a clue to how the team feels, how they're doing, how they're responding to the training. And so the more data you have, the better, but you don't have to have a timing system out at practice every single week to do this. It can be implemented in practice. And so that's why, coaches can open up their brain and figure out a way to tie this into our base running session. We're going to do 3 sprints through the first base, or, first to thirds or whatever at max intensity with full rests so that we get that stimulus.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah, I would like to, I quote Zach all the time. He's a quote machine. His book, Movement Over Maxes. I absolutely love that. Fast, fun, frequent. Oh, shoot. Zach, help me out.
Fast. You threw me off now. Now I'm not going to remember it either. It's the 4 F's: fast, fun, frequent, and hold on, I've got it pulled up.
Fun's at the end, Zach. Come
Fun's
on.
at the end, and that's why you screwed me up.
I know.
Fresh. How do we forget fresh? The most
Fresh is the most important thing, right? All high
fresh?
performance is built on a base of rest, recovery, sleep, what my shirt says, nutrition, hydration. All those things have to be done in order to be fresh enough to sprint. And I love the thing about data that when you show coaches data, you can change them. One of the things I quote Zach all the time, I believe you say this, that our warm-up is our workout and our workout is our warm-up, that a speed workout is so brief. My atomic speed workout, for example, is 15 minutes long, and there's only 60 seconds of work. 60 seconds of work in 15 minutes. And even though I created this to kind of create atomic habits in athletes, after reading the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, but it was never really meant to replace those 40-minute fatigue-seeking warm-ups that so many teams did. But it has. Yeah, there was a basketball team in Minnesota that did the atomic speed workout after a shoot around, the day of a game, because it's the greatest warm-up in the world. You feel better after a speed workout than you felt before. It makes it totally unlike any type of workout I've ever considered doing. That kids, their CNS is lit up. That if you sprint and then go to the weight room, they will be better in the weight room. If you sprint and then start football practice, they will be better in their first drill after that sprint workout. So it's just a win-win. And then you throw in the health thing too, that your kids will be healthier and your volumes will decrease because you want to keep your kids fast. And so they'll stay healthy in that way too.
Beautiful. Okay, awesome. I was just taking some more notes. We might circle back to a couple more things here, but we do have, and by the way, Zach, we got wellness and readiness assessments dropped in the chat, which I think.
Thank you. I was just, I was looking for like a readiness assessment or a subjective wellness questionnaire, something like that. And my brain was lost.
100%. Cool. Well, we've got some good questions in the Q&A and quite a few. I think you guys got people's brains going, which is great. So we'll just start at the top here. We have a question coming in. Should you be training speed at MD1? What about after games?
Match day -1, is that what he's saying? I think
-1, correct. Right? Yes.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'll handle it a little bit since I'm more on the team. Well, I'm not on the team sport side, I guess. Yes, but I think it depends on your holistic schedule, right? I think MD -1 is fine, but it's like Charlie Francis used to say, we can touch it, but you better not do a bunch of it, right? Because you've got a high intensity day coming up the following day with a game, match, whatever it is. And so, yes, you can touch it, but you need to spend very little time there. And so you don't, like Tony says, you don't want to burn the steak. So it needs to be a small stimulus. Yes. No problems with that. Just control your volume. Again, what Tony said earlier, control your volumes.
And the thing about, I believe the second half of that question was after a game. I never speed train anybody who is sore, tired, depressed. Those things, I found that that they will get more benefit. This is hard for coaches to understand. They will get more benefit from sitting in a chair than they will speed training when they are not fresh. So I know we have to do the next best thing all the time, but it's not good to speed train after a practice or after lifting. It's horrible to speed train, let's say the morning after a Friday night football game. That you just don't do that. Let the kids sleep till noon on Saturday. Let them recover, and then once you start timing stuff, you'll learn stuff. Like, well, we probably shouldn't have timed anything today because we're all beat up. Yeah. So let's learn from that.
100%. I mean, I didn't catch the after the game thing, but that still needs to be tied into your holistic schedule of where are we optimizing recovery. You have to organize your schedule to optimize recovery so that you can do these high intensity efforts and actually get something out of it to develop and protect yourself against injury. And so that needs to be thought of. And that's one of the reasons I don't do a bunch of stuff after baseball games. Guys are already shot because they've been on the field, and it's not just a physical fatigue. They've got mental fatigue as well. And so to me, once you've competed and done those things, get away from it, rest, recover, let's get ready for the next day. And this is a study I cite all the time. It's a study, I think, in the 1969 Soviet Sports Review. So what they did was they took their Olympic athletes, and I can't remember what sport it was from. I think it was weightlifting, but they applied a training stimulus, right? And then they monitored post-workout means 0, 3, 9, and I think 24 hours later. And they applied different means, such as like hydrotherapy, hot, cold tubs, contrast, massage, all this other stuff, right? And they applied it at all these different intervals. The only interval that they found that they had super compensated and actually recovered was at 24 hours, 24 hours later. And what that's saying is that everything that you do to a human being is stress. It doesn't matter if you get in the hot tub, cold tub, whatever you want to do, that's stress to a human being. And so they would try to force recovery to these athletes. The only point in time that they were actually recovered and could display supercompensation in whatever, tests that they had done, it was med ball throws and some force plate jumps and things like that. The only time that they could actually show that they had supercompensated and recovered was 24 hours later after that training session. Nothing else provided better results. In fact, everything else before 24 hours decreased your ability to recover. And so your everything was down. It didn't matter what you did. It's all stress. And so that's why I tell our baseball players are always like, well, why can't I do a bunch of rotator cuff work and all this stuff after I get out of a start of a game? Well, the reason is because all we're doing is fatiguing something that's already fatigued. And so I'm not going to apply anything to you until the next day when you've had a chance to sleep, eat, hydrate, all those pieces. Then we can start the recovery process. If you do it before that, all you are doing is digging a deeper hole of fatigue.
Now, having said that, Zach, I've heard through my friend Kyle Bolton that used to be at TCU, that TCU had really spent a lot of money on recovery equipment. Is there, with what you just said, does that mean recovery equipment is overrated? Or are there certain modes of recovery that you prescribe to?
Tough question. We are putting in a restoration center here. Do I think recovery modalities are overrated? Yeah, truthfully, I do. I would rather have my athletes eat, sleep, and hydrate, right? That's recovery. You crush those pieces, and we don't have to worry about the air up boots and the red light therapy and all that other stuff. Now, those can be pieces tied into it. Yes, but I don't think that necessarily covers up when you can't handle the big rocks, right?
That makes me feel better because I am not real techie on recovery equipment and all that stuff. I have some, but I mean, I never tell a guy not to do the ice bath. If they want it and they believe it in their head, that the ice bath's going to help them, you go ahead. But if they ask me, Coach, you think ice baths help? I say, I think they make you cold. Go home and take a nap.
Yeah, I mean, crush the big rocks of nutrition, hydration, and sleep, and see what that does for you. And you probably don't need a bunch of that other stuff, right? Now, that's not to say that other stuff doesn't work at times and things like that, but constantly having to rely on that and believe that that's the difference maker for you, I think is actually a negative thing. I don't think we want athletes to develop a dependency on this, that they have to have this in order to get recovery. Crush the big rocks. And so that's what we preach first and foremost.
Yeah, with sleep, I think I'm starting to connect with kids a little better about sleep when I tell them that I don't know if this is absolute fact, but I pretend it is, that we only grow when we sleep. We only heal when we sleep.
Yeah.
That that we have hormones in our body that do wonderful things for us, that won't do wonderful things for us when we're awake. That we have to have that sleep. And when people say, Coach, I feel slow today, I always say, you didn't sleep enough last night. And they're like, did you talk to my mom? I'm like, I just know. I just know if a kid's slow, it's probably a lack of sleep. And when a kid gets hurt, a lot of times, if it's not the volume of practice, it's a lack of sleep. So it's the lowest hanging fruit, and it's maybe the hardest thing that a high school or college athlete could ever have to do, is to sleep 9 hours at night.
100%. And so that's why we chase constantly the consistency and habits, right? Develop habits of consistency in these big rocks, so that we don't have to utilize all these other pieces, right? There's actually a great study with youth athletes that showed, I can't remember the exact number, but if a youth athlete was sleeping less than 6 or 7 hours a night, they were, a double chance of injury in their sport or something like that. It was a really good study, and I'm not helping you guys out, the people online, by citing this thing properly, but there are studies out there that talk about sleep all the time. Actually, the Stanford basketball study is one of them. They took, I believe it was Stanford, the men's basketball team, and they looked at their free throw percentage and 3-point percentage over the course of a season, I believe. And when they slept more, all that stuff went up. So look for that study.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm super glad that we went down that road, because I'm like, we got to have you guys back just to talk on that topic of recovery and best ways to recover, and what you think is moves the needle more there than less, because that's actually super interesting for me to hear. I think that's different than what's out there kind of in the zeitgeist in terms of all these different recovery methods. However, we do have like 19 questions in the chat, and I want to try to get through as many of them as possible, because there's some really good ones in here. So let's go ahead and hit this next one. So Coach Marcos asks, many coaches argue plyos are enough to stay explosive and get those fast hamstring contractions in season without doing speed training. What is your take on that?
For me, it's like, I love plyos. I think that, that the speed training and jump training, it's kind of like same coin, different sides. That if I see somebody 5'10" go up and dunk a basketball, I will do everything it takes to get him onto my track team, because I've never seen him sprint, but I know he's fast. So jumping, bouncing, all those things, wonderfully important. I just don't understand the people who want to plant beans and grow corn. Why you would ever say no to sprinting. And the only things I can think of, Zach alluded to it earlier, and that is this thing that they saw people sprint fast and get hurt. But usually it's because they have not been sprinting, and running and sprinting are two different things. And the other thing is, I think that slow people have a kind of an anti-speed, mantra, and so many people that work in weight rooms were not the cats of the world that won races. They were people that really got great results by lifting, and they fell in love with lifting. And I think that's one of the things that makes Zach different, because I've talked to Zach before, and unlike many people that work in weight rooms, Zach comes from speed. He comes from being a fast athlete.
Yeah. So my response to that is that no, that's not acceptable. I would do whatever you can do to find a way to get some type of speed work in. In one of my presentations, which the one I presented with Tony, it was Dr. Ken Clark found that at the NFL Combine, they needed basically all NFL athletes at the Combine were somewhere between 93 and 96% of their top end speed at 20 yards, which If you can get a 95% stimulus, that's perfect. So find a place that you can get a 20-yard sprint in, and you're probably going to cover your bases pretty well, right? With team sport athletes for the most part. We'd love to have some more, but the situation doesn't always allow that, right? You might not have space. The other thing I would say is, so Dr. Brian Heiderscheit, who is a researcher at the University of Wisconsin, is one of the smartest guys I've ever talked to. He did a presentation for us on, he's the lead researcher for hamstring injuries and rehab with the NFL. And so basically they did a study and showed that the weight room, and now this is granted, this isn't plyos, but the weight room, there is not any exercise in the weight room that comes even close to being able to stimulate the amount of motor units, the muscle fibers, anything comes close to actual speed training. And so the highest thing that they had, highest exercise that they could find was something like still 60% of what speed training actually provides when it comes to motor unit recruitment. And so there is no replacement for sprinting. There's no replacement for sprinting, no matter what the question is. There is none.
There's none. And I think that thing about the weight room, what's really dangerous is that not only does the weight room not bulletproof you from soft tissue injury, I believe that the weight room in the absence of speed training can actually create more fragile athletes. Now that's I'll probably get some hate mail over that. My point being, you must sprint along with, and it doesn't have to be the majority, but it does need to be prioritized in terms of freshness. And one of the things that I like to say is that the most extreme human movement in the entire human experience is sprinting as fast as you can in a straight line and getting timed. There is nothing more extreme than that. And when you train that extreme, you train the range. And for those weightlifting people out there, that basically means that, if you can bench 405, I imagine you're pretty good at benching lower weights as well. Well, that's the same way with speed. When we train that extreme in very small doses, and people think, oh yeah, holler, those guys are at max speed like 3 hours a week. No, we're not. In an entire week, we're at max speed less than 20 seconds. We are within a couple percent of our max speed sprinting, less than 20 seconds a week. And that is a hugely sprint-based program that I run. You just can't live at that mountaintop. You have to be there in very, very short segments. But I also say that those, let's say 16 seconds of max speed sprinting, it's the best thing we do all week long. 16 seconds is more important than all the other time we spend as a track team.
Love it.
I've got one more thing to add to this too, Dylan. He said something in his comment just a second ago. This is another thing that Dr. Heiderscheit presented to us was they did a testing in a study, and sprinting at 95% versus 85% was exponentially different. It wasn't a linear increase that, hey, 10% more. Okay, 10% more, we got a little bit more in intensity and intent. The difference between 85 and 95 or 75 and 95% plus of max intent at sprinting was completely different. It was completely different. And the stimulus that you got at, Charlie Francis has talked about this forever. The stimulus you got at 75 and 85 was not enough to actually create the adaptations or prepare you for anything that happens at full speed. So that was one of his take-home points was, don't think that sprinting at 90% is doing you any benefit, because you need to be 95% plus with high intent to be able to gather the benefits. And so that's practices with sports are that 75 to 85% all the time. And guess what? When you need it, you either don't have it or you hurt it.
I say that sports teams, and you could say basketball, baseball, soccer, whatever, practice is basically a third gear exercise, that everything's in third gear. Now, because of that, most guys don't even have a fifth gear because they've never been exposed to anything other than slogging through practices all the time. But at the very least, those same coaches that accept high effort third gear practice still expects fourth or fifth gear play in a game. And you can just imagine the soft tissue stress that happens when you do that. So introducing the idea of the wave theory, where you don't try to make every practice as hard as it can be. That maybe you if you do burn the steak a little bit on Monday, you take Tuesday off, or you have a low day on Tuesday. And then I can't say it enough that the data will teach you things that when you time stuff, when you GPS stuff, it's just really hard to ignore it.
Eye-opening, 100%. I mean, and maybe we'll get into this in a minute or two, but we need to talk about the demands of the sport, right? And where sport coaches often make the mistake based on what we've seen with data of how they handle their practices, especially preseasons.
Right.
Let's talk about that now.
Hold on. I want to add one thing, which is don't be afraid to bring the controversy, gentlemen. Tony a minute ago was like, we're going to get some hate mail for this. That's why we keep having you back, man, because we'll make sure that when we send this call out, the headline is, recovery equipment is a scam and fragile, and it's
clickbait.
So, sport coaches don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to limit the conversation because I think this is great. I think the audience is getting a ton of value out of it. I do want to hit a few more questions. So Tony, if you want to dive into that real quick, let's do it, because I think there are some questions around that in the chat. And to the audience, we probably won't get to every question that's here. So I'm going to try to hand select a few that I feel like kind of bundle together into topics. But Tony, go ahead and dive into that, because we do.
One of the most, when the clinic that Zach has referenced was our sprint-based football clinic that we had in Argyle, Texas. And Zach spoke, and the most fascinating stuff to me, he works with baseball, and the volumes of the first week of baseball practice just blew me away. And he was talking about how his job has to be to prepare those athletes for those volumes, even if he doesn't agree with those volumes, which is interesting. And I get really preachy in early August about football coaches doing too much. I mean, if there weren't state laws that prevent it, football coaches would still be doing double sessions, which are the dumbest thing in the history of sports. There's probably tied with the dumbest things in the history of sports, but the really high volumes hurt kids. And I believe that we want to get to the first game, that first football game under the lights on a Friday night, only 80% in shape. We want to be 100% healthy, which means 100% fast, and only 80% in shape. And I believe I got this from Eric Corum, who is a sleep expert, Dr. Eric Corum. He's spoken to several TFCs. He says that every coach should be uncomfortable. I love that word. Uncomfortable with how little they do the first week. And when he says uncomfortable, he understands that coaches want to do more. Coaches want to practice 12 hours a day, but they need to stay uncomfortable with how little they do in the first week. And I believe they need to be uncomfortable in the second week and the third week and the fourth week. But that whole idea that we're not trying to be 100% in shape, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think it's that correlation of volume equals value, right? Which is so like it's an underlying theme in this conversation in general. I feel like in speed training, in season, out of season, is like your atomic workout, Tony, is like it's the opposite of that, right? And so I feel like that's one of the core beliefs that both athletes and coaches carry around in general, is that like volume equals value. And so I can see how it's hard for coaches to feel like, man, if we're not doing all of these things, I'm not providing my athletes value. So I think that's a really good point. Zach, anything?
Zach, what can you repeat some of the things you talked about with your first week volume stuff?
Yeah. So, Dylan, I actually have that slide pulled up. If you want me to share my screen, if it doesn't work, I won't, but I'll still talk about it. So here's what it is. It's the shiny new toy effect. And actually I got this from Tom Myslinski, who presented at a TFC and talked about this, Tony. The shiny new toy effect is basically your kids come down at Christmas, super excited to see a new toy. They play with it for the first 3 days and then they never touch it again, right? That's coaches and athletes at practices the first week that practice starts. Coaches say, we got to get a bunch done. We're behind. We got to get a bunch in. We got to get a bunch in. And so you see these massive spikes in workloads and volumes that these athletes are not prepared for, basically throughout the first 4 weeks of camp, but specifically in the first week of preseason or camp or whatever it is. And I saw, when we had GPS, I saw the highest volumes the entire season. So an entire course of a year with our baseball program, the highest volumes happened on the first 3 days that these athletes were moving around and running and all these things with, the data from GPS. The first 3 days, that's like telling somebody that you're going to go run a marathon, or I'm going to run a marathon. So my first day, my first workout's going to be 20 miles. My second day is going to be 25, and my third day is going to be 30 miles. I'm going to get right after it. That's the stupidest thing you would ever do. But these coaches do it consistently and ramp up these huge volumes. And then, to be honest, your athletes are super healthy in season because they drop the volumes back down, because now you're playing games and all these other things, and you're not in camp, right? They have this notion, this preconceived notion that you have to destroy kids in camp. And that's why all your kids get hurt in camp. If you look at Major League Baseball statistics, NFL statistics, anything, any sport, you have the most injuries at the start of preseason in that first 4 weeks. And then once the season starts, they tail off and they're at their lowest point at the end of the season, which that shouldn't be the case, because you're actually at your hardest and most intentful play and all these other pieces at the end of the season. But that's not when everybody gets hurt, because they are not prepared for the demands of the sport. And so this is what GPS gives you. Did you allow me to share this? Can I share this?
Give it a try.
All right. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll go without it. Let's see there.
But that's great, because one of the questions that came in was around like, hey, what are your tips for retraining speed if you're facing a cycle of no speed training? And so I feel like this is right on par. It's like the answer there is like, you should be uncomfortable with how little you're doing. I love that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can definitely touch on that as well. Can you guys see this now?
Yes.
So this is data from games and practices, and I broke it up. This is the benefit for me to have GPS. It's not to say, hey, these guys are trashed, we can't practice hard today. Get Mikey, you got to wait. I've got athletes trying to walk in my door right now. It's not to say that you can't do stuff today because these guys are tired. For me, it was to see what they need to be prepared for when the first day, the first week, the first month of practices happens, right? And so if you look at this, the first column, their max velocity in game, our guys that play actually touch full speed. And so that's another misnomer that coaches, oftentimes in my sport, baseball, they're like, they never sniff max speed. Acceleration's the only thing we need to train because they never touch max speed. That's a complete lie. We used to see 100% efforts on our GPS constantly in game. So if I knew if you were playing in game, most likely you were going to get a high-speed stimulus. This goes back to the bench players. If your bench players aren't seeing game time, they don't get it in practice. That's why you have to put it in the warm-up so that they're getting that stimulus, because practice only touches about 18.5 miles an hour on our team average, which that is below 90%, just like Tony and I have been talking about, right? If you look at average player loads per session, practices 40% higher. Average distances per session, practices 40% higher, 39%. Your distance is over 12 miles an hour, the fifth column over there, 21% more in practice. And so what do you see? The constant theme here is that you're doing way more work than you need to in practice. That's why you have to prepare your athletes for the practices and not the games. The coach's job is to organize practice so that it prepares them for the game. Our job, my job as a performance coach, is to prepare the athletes so that they don't get hurt in the first 4 weeks of practice. And this is the data that GPS gives me. Average high-speed distance, 85% plus intensity. You can see in practices, it's 35% less than what you get in games. Again, you don't touch high intent speed in practices. And then your acceleration and deceleration efforts, practices again, more. And so you can't prepare your athletes for the games. You, as a performance specialist, me as a strength coach, I have to prepare my athletes for the practices so that they can survive that 4 weeks to make it to a game. Just like Tony said, I use this all the time. I use a different number, but it came from Tony. I need 100% of our athletes at 90% of their, conditioning, or whatever you want to call it, preparation for the first game versus they're 100% prepared, but we only have 90% of our athletes, because the 10% of the athletes that you lost in the 4 weeks that you had camp, may be the difference makers between an undefeated season and a 5-5 season, right? And so way better to be 100% with your athletes and 90% prepared than the other.
Which I remember telling Zach a couple of weeks ago in Texas that just imagine if we could get coaches to understand their loads a little better, so that we would not have to do conditioning preseason to prepare our kids for the conditioning of the season. It just seems, like if we truly prepared kids for the game, our loads would decline during those first 4 weeks. And then guys like Zach could spend more time training the things that I think wins games: speed, explosiveness, athleticism, those things.
What I'm like trying to digest the paradigm shift that Zach just dropped on me, at least right now, which is your job as the performance coach is to prepare the athlete for practice. It was like, I feel like that's such a valuable paradigm shift for people in similar positions to hear. Okay, cool, gentlemen. Zach, I know we're going to get a ton of asked on this, so either way, you can say yes or no, but is that presentation something the audience could have access to? And if they can't, that's all good, but I think we've already got questions for people asking.
They'll probably have to get it through some of the other sources, only because I think I do have it out there, but it's probably a paid product through Tony and some other people. So I can't give it away right now. You got to see me in person, or you got to pay for it through Tony.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and that sprint-based football clinic is available. All 9 presentations are available for $99 on CoachTube, and Zach's is worth $99 all by itself.
Beautiful. Okay, cool, gents. I think we have time for one more quick question here, and then we'll kind of wrap up with some house cleaning. So let me find one. There was a juicy one in here that I'm trying to look for. It was around focusing more. Here it is. Can you train max velocity and acceleration on the same day? I always see coaches have one day as max velocity and another day for accels. Can they be combined on the same day is the question, and maybe specifically in the context of, does that change in season versus out of season, how you guys approach max velocity versus acceleration?
I'll answer that real quick.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't have acceleration days and speed days. When we talk about running a 10-yard fly, picture a 40-yard dash, and we're just going to time the final 10. So even though we're focused on max speed, we still start with a maximal acceleration. Our final speed drill of our speed drills that we do before we sprint is an acceleration, and we talk acceleration. In our X Factor stuff, we do all the partner resisted things and the bands and the short sprints up hills and all the things that you do for acceleration during X Factor. But every time we sprint, we accelerate, and I've just never seen a reason to separate it.
Yeah, I agree, and he said it already earlier. Max speed is the tide that lifts all ships, and so you're training maximal velocity, it's gonna help acceleration as well, right? And part of that presentation, actually, I talk about that specific study by Ken Clark again, where they use their NFL Combine athletes, and if you had higher maximal speed, guess what? That was highly correlated to your acceleration, and so max speed is the tide that lifts all ships.
Beautiful. Okay, cool, guys. Well, I want to leave time for any closing, just thoughts, comments that you have on this topic. Also, for both of you guys to be able to, point the audience in direction of any other stuff that you might have out there. Zach, we put your book in the chat, but like Tony, anything that you want to plug, Zach, anything that you want to plug, Zach, we'll start with you. And again, thank you guys so much for being in here.
Yeah, my thing is trying to get the point across that it's actually super, super, super easy to train maximal velocity and enhance speed in season. You tie it into the warm-ups. It's a 5 or 7 minute segment at the end of your warm-up once a week, right? And if you're organizing your schedule so that you can optimize recovery, that truly shouldn't be a problem to get max intent efforts that are close to or above PRs throughout your week, right? And so that's the thing I keep telling coaches is it's super, super easy to fit these things in, and it doesn't take hardly any time at all. You just got to go up and touch it. 3 reps of a fly 10 after a warm-up in season cost you 5 to 7 minutes, and you're off into practice.
Love it.
And that easiness that Zach is talking about, I've had people come and visit my practice, and they say things like, so this is all you do? Or this is it? What am I missing here? I don't think at one time during our almost hour that we've talked here today, have we talked about how important it is to be a technician in terms of sprint mechanics. That somebody, I think I could teach somebody who is totally foreign to sprinting how to be a sprint coach within a week. You don't have to know everything. Matter of fact, sometimes the more you know, the worse you get. It's really important to teach a few fundamental things in sprinting, but the most important thing is to actually do it and time it and stay with it. So I definitely want to plug Zach's books, a book, Movement Over Maxes. I'm totally impressed with that. And I mentioned it before, but anybody that's interested in sprint-based football, it's become a big deal. We had 8 state champions last year who fed the cats instead of having the old model of crushing your athletes every night and creating toughness through fatigue and all that BS. And when you hear these coaches like Brad Dixon and Garrett Mueller and Eric Becker, guys like this talk about how reborn they were when they started doing this less is more, quality over quantity, everybody healthy type of thing. They became healthier as coaches, and it's all about winning as well. If the things that we're talking about did not lead to winning, our message would be empty. But it does lead to winning, and that gets us excited.
Love it. Zach, any other place besides your book that you would send people to get any other value from you?
They can follow me on social media. I had a child in January, so I haven't been super active on social media, but everything is my website, social media is all Zach Dechant, at Zach Dechant or at zachdechant.com. So they can go and see what we offer, and there's some speed-based stuff in there. So
beautiful. And we'll send all you guys' stuff out for the audience when we send out the recording, and Zach will make sure to spell your name right so that people can find you. But yeah, gentlemen, honestly, the hour always flies by. It's been an awesome conversation. There's been so much to unpack here to the audience. I know that there's a lot of questions that in the chat that we didn't specifically get to, but I think that there was a wealth of information here, and a lot of those questions probably got answered, but it just means that we'll have to have you guys back because the engagement has been super high. Obviously, the audience is seeing a ton of value and interest in learning from you guys. So thank you so much for being here. It's just a quick note. We'll plug Speed Labs here. So I am our director of sales for Universal Speed Rating. We have our Speed Labs partnership. If you are a performance training business, so a commercial training business that wants to be the gold standard when it comes to speed and getting athletes faster, learn more about our community. We'll send out a link for you guys to set up an intro call if you're interested in learning more. But these are the types of conversations we're having in our community all the time, as well as doing a lot of stuff with our software, the Universal Speed Rating on the analytics side, and also a lot of best practices on the business side of things. So again, if you're a commercial performance training business and want to be the gold standard when it comes to speed, hit us up and learn more about the Speed Lab partnership. Zach, Tony, anything else?
I'm good.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Everybody for jumping in. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Dylan.